Seeing no items of new business, we will move to business items. And item 6.1, Resland Development Variance Permit Application Report from the Municipal Planner. Do I have receipt? Moved and seconded. All those in favor? And the Municipal Planner.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I have a presentation to give about this development application. The proposal, the subdivision area comprises of 4 existing properties, and they are located at the end of Kensington and Bly in this area here, and go to the corner of McCourt and the highway. The official community plan designation of the properties is residential that supports single-family development. The zoning is R1, single-family with a minimum lot size of 500 square meters, and anything less than 600 square meters requires an intensive residential development permit. The developer has also developed most of this area here above, and most recently this square here. There's some shots of McCourt Road from, I believe, 2014. So you can see the steepness of the road, and the intersection at the highway is going to be improved and the road is going to be widened. There will be a continuous sidewalk, and in order to do that, the proposal includes a retaining wall along here. This is a photograph from the top of McCourt Road looking down on McCourt towards the ocean. This is from the corner of Kensington and Bly Road. You can see the development site expands in here to this area. These trees are on a neighboring property that isn't under the subdivision application. The proposed subdivision layout is for 31 lots. Due to the corner here with no access onto the highway, we've got a fairly large lot there, lot 29, and it's been highlighted. And that's the general for information. So the development permit request, some of the property is in development permit area number 5 for steep slopes ranging from 20 to 30%. The part that's in the green is the 30%, and you can see it just touches a number of the lots, including the lot 29 and the proposed lot that's in this area here. The development permit area guidelines talk about slopes generally not supported on anything over 30%. However, it could be considered if it's demonstrated that the development will not create environmental or visual impacts, and it can be sensitively integrated into the terrain and presents no hazards to persons or property. And then lands with slopes 20 to 30% may be suitable for building at lower densities with special site planning techniques. The DPA 5 then also goes on to list the different areas there are a number of policies around, and they come under the basic design principles: natural areas of vegetation, building sites, building height and massing, driveways and garages, site grading, retaining walls, road design, stormwater management, parks and trails, and fire hazard. And how this proposal will meet the guidelines: we've received a geotechnical landslide assessment assurances statement that's in your package, as well as a geotechnical report whose summary states that based on the findings of the assessment, and as long as the recommendations are followed, that there is no reasonable conceivable geotechnical issues that would preclude the safe development of a single-family residential dwellings on the site. The report goes on, and the recommendations cover the building locations, excavations and trenching, foundations design, site drainage, retaining walls, and field reviews. The applicant has also designed the layout to include larger lots provided on the steeply sloped lots. So that corner lot 29 is over 1,000 square meters, as well as the other lot that's on the other side towards Bly and Kensington is also over 1,000 square meters. There'll be no visual impacts on those steeper sections where those houses are going to be for the existing homes in the area. There's a minimizing of the alteration of the natural grades. They would like to keep the natural grade as much as possible and work with it. They're minimizing cut and fill and retaining walls. There's a variation of lot sizes and subdivision layout that reflect the natural site contours. And these are all the policies that are coming out of the guidelines. So you'll see that's coming up. There's a building scheme is going to be registered that will speak to the requirements of the height, the roof lines and materials, and the building scheme will match the existing development that's to the north. The driveway grades will not exceed 15%. The subdivision works and servicing agreement will include an erosion control plan, both during construction and afterwards, a stormwater management plan, and a landscaping plan for streetscaping and the proposed park plantings. There's a small pocket park provided with the pathway connection to link McCourt Road, the new Road A, and Kensington Road. And there's pedestrian sidewalks on all of the new roads, at least on one side. And the roads typically follow the natural grades, and there'll be major improvements to the McCourt Road and highway intersection, including a right-hand turn bay at the intersection on the highway. The development variance permit. The Bylaw 430 has a section in it on section 12, and I'm not sure why it's not coming up, but I think it's 17.5. The provision of frontage by means of a panhandle access strip may be considered only when there's no practical or suitable alternative exists. And the area occupied by any such panhandle shall be in addition to the parcel size minimum as required in the zoning bylaw, and shall have a minimum width of 6 meters. The part that the applicant is requesting to vary is the 6 meters of that statement. And they would like to vary it to 4.5 meters. You can see here the proposed lot. It does need a panhandle because of that large retaining wall that's going to be constructed here. And there's no access allowed onto the highway. So to come back here. The panhandle strip, again, approximates to the highway intersection, retaining walls and grades at McCourt Road. And the 4.5 meter request is coming from because they would like to keep all of the neighboring properties at a minimum of 600 square meters. Just to allow for the building size. The development to the north, the existing development, is at a minimum of 600 square meters. The proposed mitigation for this, in consultation with the fire department and the engineering department, the large lots are being proposed as well as a corner truncation, fire sprinkling of any new home, and there's going to be a walkway established in here with stairs to allow the fire trucks to park here and here to fight any fire from both directions. So that this will be a level coming up from the sidewalk area. And that was their request. You can see here the building area, potential building house, the size of the house, they put that in as well. The recommendations are to the council agree in principle and that the official notification take place to neighboring property owners and residents. That the development variance permit that's the recommendation, that it be approved if it's gone through that process. And that the condition of its approval is that the cast in place concrete walkway and stairwell be in there, as discussed, as well as a registered covenant about the sprinkling of the home. Moving on to the development permit, we're recommending that council approve the development permit for those 4 lots that are indicated, and that the development permit require this for the subdivision layout and include the recommendations and information and analysis provided in the geotechnical report and the landslide assessment. And your options are to modify or deny the development permit, and also to modify or deny the development variance permit, or to go with the recommendations as staff is recommending. And if the recommendations are endorsed, then the next steps will be to notify the neighboring property owners about that proposed development variance and to bring it back to council for final consideration. And if it's approved by council, staff will work with the developer on fulfilling the conditions of the DP and the variance issuance, as well as work through the stages of subdivision development, such as servicing agreement, construction, DCC collection, final subdivision approval. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So do we have any questions from committee on the report? Councilor Seegers.
Thank you. Let me just get back to the right pages here. Okay, so all the lots will be over 600 square meters is what's been indicated, so they're not subject to DPA 8.
That's correct.
Okay, and then that stairwell that the fire department is requesting put in, is that going to be then a public access? Like, is that, I mean, we've got a concrete stair coming up to a lot. Are we looking at having an easement across there, or how are they actually, because do we stop the public from using it? Is it a private staircase?
Yes, it's a private staircase.
Okay. Okay, I just, given that it's concrete and it's coming up from the road and has access to those other lots across there, I don't know how we make sure that it stays private unless somehow it's closed off.
We can work with the developer on options around that. As long as they're, during an emergency, the fire department has access to that. That would
I'm
be,
wondering if you maybe wanted to go the other way and actually have it where it feeds into that road and has access for walking for the public.
it wasn't something we considered.
Right, but I mean, I'm just looking at where it is, right? Given, you know, has access basically to the subdivision without having to go up the hill for people.
But if they wanted to park in their driveway, there might be issues and conflict
Yes.
there.
Yes, totally. The panhandle piece belongs to that property then,
That's correct.
Okay. Then I did notice that there was a bit of a discrepancy between the plan that we have here, where we have this lot indicated as 29, but if I look on page 53 in the report, that's in the Geotechnical Report, they actually call it lot 30. So we just need to make sure that they've just,
It could be they were using a former lot layout in review of the
so
application.
we just need to make sure that we've got some consistency through
Yes.
those. I think that was all I had on this one. Let me just have a second. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Further questions from committee?
No, I don't have any questions. I'm ready to recommendation number 2.
Okay, before I entertain that, I had a couple myself.
Okay.
So that easement there at the end of the cul-de-sac, is that a utility easement? Is that what that is?
Those are the setback lines.
Oh, okay. Okay. So there's no easement there.
Actually, there is. Sorry, I'm mistaken. There is an easement there to access this sewer line. It's a sewer and stormwater right away.
So this whole subdivision will be attached to sewer.
That's correct.
Okay. And then on the engineering report, I believe they talked about 5 lots rather than 4. Is that just a discrepancy?
I think that they were counting if I go back here, they were counting this. Just go back here. They were counting this property here, which is giving a small amount of dedication, and they're doing that. The applicant has looked at that, so that there's a very small portion though of that property is going to be dedicated to the road to allow a fuller width road to be developed.
Right.
And I believe that was the 5th property.
Okay. And then we're seeing some on-street parking then. I believe that Kensington Road, that's right, that has on-street parking on it. Is that correct?
There'll be some parking pockets here, and I believe, yes, in here there's parking as well. And on Bly Road. This is a future connection into Burnett Road, so this will be called Burnett, and it has a potential for future connection.
Okay. And then with regards to the retaining wall on the bottom, what is that meant to be built out of? Do we know at this stage?
I'm not aware of what the construction will be.
Okay, because that's going to be a pretty significant wall. It's just a heads up. Any others? I think that's it from me. Any further thoughts from committee? Okay, if I have somebody then move recommendation number 2. Moved by Councillor Shanks, second by Councillor Seegers. Any discussion at this point? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Moving for recommendation number 3, Councillor Seegers.
Yeah, so moved.
Councillor
So second.
Shanks, any discussion of that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Okay, great. That's carried. Thank you very much for that. So moving on to item 6.2, development variance permit and development permit for Rona. Report from the community planner. Motion for receipt. Yeah, moved and seconded. All those in favor? That's carried. Ms. Stepjevic.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. So this is an application from Coast Builders Rona Seashelt for a development permit and a development variance permit. The location of the application is in downtown Seashelt. It's a building supply business on approximately 0.8 hectare site. It's adjacent to the Bandlands to the east, commercial areas to the south and west, and there's a residential lot at the northeast, which currently belongs to the applicant as well. The subject lots are in the C4, commercial 4 zone, which permits uses such as building supply and retail office and warehousing. Zoning requirements are a maximum lot coverage of 75% for buildings and structures, front yard setback of 7.5 meters, a rear yard setback of 3 meters, and a 3 meter from a side lot line if it's abutting a residential zone, a C2 commercial zone, or a street or lane. Otherwise, it's a 0 side yard permitted. So the proposal is to upgrade aging racks and storage structures on Lot B and Lot 5, which are the 2 outer lots. This thing runs with me, sorry. Okay, so it's to provide additional storage for their racks. The rack and storage system is called an auto stack system. It's constructed on a concrete foundation. It will provide for vehicles to access and has roof coverage. Because they're requiring a building permit for this, it triggers a development variance permit and a development permit. You can see the 2 proposed buildings are right here, and building number 2 is right there. So this requires a setback variance from the zoning bylaw for the rear lot lines, shown in red there. And it also requires servicing variance from our bylaw 430 for the sidewalk width, street lights, and undergrounding of utilities along the frontage of Wharf Avenue. There's a bit more detail about the servicing variance. It's basically, the bylaw requires a 2 meter wide concrete sidewalk, paved sidewalk, and the applicant has proposed to reduce that to a 1.5 meter wide to match existing sidewalk portions, which are already along the frontage. There's some gravel and some paved sections. And they would also propose to do 0.5 meter of landscaping on the street side along their existing chain link fence, and they would turn the barbed wires inward. For the utility servicing, they have requested a variance, and staff concurs that the utility servicing requirement of undergrounding the hydro, cable, and telephone wires and poles on all the road frontages could be done at a subsequent development application, because it's not they're proposing that it's not financially feasible for them to do that amount of work with that amount of cost for the upgrade to the storage structures that they're proposing. And the streetlights as well, we would require 2 decorative streetlights on Wharf Avenue, and the engineering staff has stated that that could also be done at a later subsequent development application stage, and that it be put into a covenant, a registered covenant on title. Here are some photographs to give you a better idea for the variance. So we've got the existing newer construction of the Rona building here. This is an old structure from, say, I think in the 80s it was constructed. And there's various and numerous other structures, such as the one shown at the back property line, just behind, like if you were to look to the side of this building, this is kind of what it looks like. It abuts right to the lot line, and there's a variety of structures holding different building supplies. So then this picture shows the northeast. This is the residence. There's a house on that residential lot right there, and it's, again, abutting the lot. So there is no side yard setback existing right now with these structures, and the east along the back. So the entire site has, sorry, that was the next one. So the entire site has open storage. There's different plywood piles and different items that are exposed to the elements, and the proponent would like to improve the organization and the coverage for all those things. Here's a picture of Wharf Avenue with the existing sidewalks. So we wouldn't be able to require them to do the middle lot because our bylaw only requires the frontage for the lots that are undergoing the development. So they've proposed to do a less wide sidewalk at 1.5 meters for the entire stretch, and to landscape along the fence here until such time as they do a future development application, when it would require that all the undergrounding and pavement be brought to the standards of our bylaw. So just, you might not be able to see it very well in here, but the Ford, one of the neighboring lots further along, does have 2 meter wide, and it's paved with the poles kind of in the middle, and there could be a case made that it's not achieving an actual 2 meter wide sidewalk at this point anyways. So the other part of the application is a development permit, which is required for downtown Sechelt to provide guidance for achieving attractive development, which contributes to a unique and viable downtown. So the development permit area evaluates for form and character, pedestrian orientation, accessibility, the streetscape, building materials, landscaping, sustainable building, and stormwater management on site. The application achieves the intent in the ways of they propose to match the color scheme to the existing building. The height and massing of their proposed storage structures are in line with the existing buildings. They would do some landscaping along the street at this time. They would reduce waste on their site by providing a recycling area, and improving the storage would result in less weathering of the supplies out there and less going into the landfill. No changes are proposed that would affect parking or signage, and all building entries will be level and accessible. So the recommendations, I've condensed them here, but the wording is in the report, that the development variance permit be approved to vary rear lot line setbacks from 3 to 1 meters to accommodate the 2 new storage warehouses, and that the servicing sidewalk requirement be reduced from 2 meters to 1.5 meters, and that the undergrounding of utilities and streetlights requirement be waived, and that a covenant be registered on the lots, requiring that at the time of subsequent development, these would be required and built. Then a further recommendation is that the development permit be approved subject to the development variance permit, if that's approved, with the conditions that the property is developed in accordance with the drawings and the landscape plan, a landscaping bond of $7,424, which was the cost estimate. Exterior materials and colors are to match existing structures. On-site exterior lighting be downcast and energy efficient, and a stormwater management plan and erosion and sediment control plan be provided. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Before I get into questions from the committee on the report, recommendation 2 in our agenda has the development variance permit going from 3 to 0 meters. Is that something that we need to amend right now? Your report was said 1 meter.
Did it?
Yeah.
That would be a mistake because it's 3 to 0.
3 to 0.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm sorry.
So this stays. No, I mean, as long as
Yeah.
this is correct.
Yeah, thanks for catching
The report
that.
can be wrong. Okay, questions from committee on this? Any questions? Councillor Seegers?
Thank you. Sorry, I've got a frog in my throat. I noticed somewhere in the report that there was mention of consolidating the lots. Is that part of what would come out of this as well?
Yeah, I'll let Tracy speak to that.
At the time for this particular development,
Put your mic down.
sorry, at the time right now for this particular development, they aren't going to do that. So what we wanted to accomplish in this, because it's just doing the racking, and they happen to get a fair bit of funding from Rona to do that, hence why the time limit is on, is an opportunity to kind of fix the site, and because it's affecting only the two, it affected our variance permits in the 430. So they wouldn't do it right now, but if they went to doing more of a substantial building, it would be really advantageous to do it at that time, because it'll trigger a higher level of development at that time.
Okay. And then I noticed through here that both Fortis and the other BC Hydro, have easements in there, and that they indicate that no development can happen there, and there also are some setbacks. Are those there's taken into account?
That's taken into account. The hydro line actually runs through on that property, so that was taken into consideration for the racking and for the building.
Okay,
setbacks.
and the setbacks for those? Okay,
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions from committee? Councillor Lutz.
Thank you. I may have missed in your explanation why a 0 setback on the rear. It looks to me there's enough property to not have a 0 setback.
If I may, through the chair, one of the requests was, because it was just the racking and not the actual building structure, allowed them to push it back a little bit more, simply to get a little more space for the vehicular traffic in there. So it was just an ability to utilize the site a little more efficiently. The stacking of the outdoor storage is in that location, so it was a matter of just putting the racking in at that time. I mean, if it was building, we would make them do a little bit more on that, but it just allowed them to be a little more efficient on the site.
So just to follow up to that, I believe in our bylaws, it's the footing of the buildings that would have to be on the setback, but then I believe there's an allowance for overhangs. So are the overhangs inside the lot line on this plan?
That. So the applicant has proposed to stay the roof structures, they are aware, can overhang by 70 centimeters. And they're aware that the entire structure has to be within that setback. And I believe that the applicants are here, but the auto stack system might be a certain size. It only comes in certain sizes. And yeah, they're aware of the setback requirements.
Okay, thank you. Further questions from committee? Councillor Shanks.
So this is somewhat similar to what the property at South Coast Ford looks like right now in terms of the sidewalk and landscaping area being in place, but not the underground wiring having taken place. So I assume we probably have a restrictive covenant on that property. No.
That one. One of the things we struggled with on this property, there were only 2 out of the 3 properties that actually needed to do anything. When we looked at, could they have done 2 meter? They could have. It would have taken out any landscaping to meet up to the fence line. What we wanted to do is negotiate with them to get a continual sidewalk there. The other issue, as Marina pointed out, when you look at the 2 meters sidewalk that was set for around the Ford dealership, it doesn't really function particularly well as a clear 2 meter sidewalk. It's got encroachments in it. It's got a lot of poles in it that are not obvious if you're going through there in the dark. So it doesn't function particularly well. So we thought by this we'd actually accomplish getting a consistent sidewalk through there, allow some ability for some landscaping around that chain link fencing to kind of soften that look a little bit more. So that, and through all 3 properties. So that was the reason. In terms of putting the undergrounding, because the nature of the money they were getting to do the racking wasn't a significant development, it made sense to, we'll protect that in a covenant. When they go to do a major development on there, that at that time we would request the undergrounding. Okay.
Mr. Vivek, you had a comment?
Just add to that, in speaking with the engineering staff, I understand that they have taken cash in lieu for a couple of other of the developments along that stretch. So they are not quite ready to do that undergrounding. And the applicants have requested that their timeline is sort of 5 to 10 years. And that seems to match the engineering's time frame as well. But I can't speak for them, but that was part of what they were deciding. One of their recommendations was that they do the work, they provide the cash in lieu, or they were also okay with this registered covenant approach.
Follow-up, Councillor Shanks?
Yeah, thanks for that information. I think that's what may have happened with the Ford dealership. Cash in.
Yeah, on the sidewalk issue, I'm just looking at the chair of the Accessibility Advisory, who's here today. I was just wondering if this has been to that committee to discuss the issue of the sidewalks. Not yet. So hopefully we can have that added before this comes to council to get some comment. I know there's a meeting next week, I believe. They provide us some pretty good insight on some of the pedestrian accessibility issues in our community. I had one question when I was looking at this, and there were a number of referrals mostly to the utilities and to the SCRD, but I didn't see one from the Shishel Nation. And of course, we're talking about varying the setback onto that community. So can we have a comment on that?
Yeah, the application was referred to the Shishel First Nation. We did not get a response, but I tried to follow up, so I could try that again. Yeah.
Any further questions from committee on this? Okay, do I have a mover for recommendation 2? Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? That's carried. Recommendation 3, moved and seconded. Any discussion on that? No. All those in favor? And that's carried. Yeah, that'll be good. It'll clean up that lot. In a way, there's a jumble of structures on that lot, and hopefully we can kind of clear that up and make it a little bit more rational, I might say. Okay. Moving forward to item 6.3, zoning bylaw for Mermac construction. I move receipt from the community planner. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Mr. Aaron Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is the Mermac construction. This is actually the revised application. This has previously gone to Planning Committee back in September. Since that time, the applicant has requested a revision to it to change it from the R1A zoning to the R1 zoning, which is a difference of going from the 700 square meter lots to 500 square meter lots. Just again, a bit of the background. So this property located here is along Shoal Way, also at the end of Link Street. Here's the golf course and the Kinnicknick Elementary School up here, as well as the arenas. So the current zoning is RR1, or Residential 1. It's in the OCP designated area, the Special Infill Area number 4. It falls within Development Permit Area 5 for steep slopes. And the newly proposed zoning is R1. And this proposed zoning would allow for approximately 21 residential lots on this property. As I mentioned before, this is the revised proposal. The previous request was for the R1A zoning, and that resulted in approximately 16 lots. Here's a potential for a proposed subdivision layout. As you can see here, there are 21 lots. These are quite similar in size to the neighboring property. The neighboring property is about 680 square meters. Most of these are around 720. But there are some smaller lots, mostly here at the north section, which is why part of the reason the applicant has requested this is fitting in some of these smaller lots right in this kind of interface with Shoal Way, as there's some steep slopes here, so they're trying to jog the road a bit to go this direction. Here's a bit of a comparison between the existing zoning, the R1 and the R1 zoning. The biggest change is the minimum lot size. The R1, of course, is a rural lot designation and has lot size of 6,666 square meters, while the R1 is much more suburban standard at 500 square meters with the minimum lot size. A lot of the uses are similar, of course, though the rural uses also has the agriculture and livestock, while the R1 is primarily the single-family dwelling use, along with some other similar residential uses such as secondary suites, transition housing, home occupation, etc. Similar heights, a little bit of reduced setback, but they also are quite smaller lots. And the lot coverage on the R1 is the 35%. So the analysis, this is consistent with the OCP in terms of its use and density, as well as the intent of the special infill area number 4. The real big purpose of how the special infill area number 4 differentiates from our other residential designations is the protection of environmentally sensitive areas. Probably see it good on this. Scroll back a little bit. Here you can see in general, this area, there is topographical concerns such as Cook Creek right along here. As you can see, this property is outside that area, and there isn't some of those constraints that a lot of the other properties in this designation would face. So it doesn't have to worry about quite so many topographical restraints such as Cook Creek or some of the steep slopes that are common in this designation. And the decrease in lot size allows for a bit more flexibility when compared to the original proposal, as I mentioned previously, when determining the lot layout. The main limiting factor, however, still is the minimum lot width, which is 18 meters. So though it does give some flexibility, that kind of becomes the more limiting factor than the actual minimum lot size. The proposal is consistent with the immediate neighborhood, with many of those neighboring lots being around 680 to 720 square meters. And this one, the smallest ones are about 580 square meters, just right around there. But most of them are in the 720 range still, with one a bit over 1,000 square meters. There are no servicing issues that would preclude the development. A development permit for development permit area 5 will be required prior to subdivision of the property. There was also, again, as the previous one, and as a condition of adoption, a sidewalk and bike lane requested as extended works to connect this proposal to the facilities along Reef Road. And those could be considered as community amenities to help further support this increase in density. So the recommendations that staff be authorized to draft a zoning bylaw amendment to support rezoning this property from R1 to R1. And yeah, that's the only recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much for your report. Any questions from committee on the report? Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. Could you go back to the picture, the layout? So on the top left, that's a road that's coming in, correct?
Half road, yes.
A half road. So we have a half road up there, and it looks like a half road on the bottom as well?
Correct.
So what happens, when does the other half road get built?
When those other, these two properties to both the south and to the west are undeveloped lots.
Yes.
So at that time of when they would get developed, they would give up that half road.
But Links Road is actually full width, is it not?
Correct.
So why are we only putting a half a road in for the rest of this, for the extension? There's a church or something down below there, isn't there?
Yes, there's a church on one side, and then so both sides of the road have been developed. So that's why they would be a full road. Under the Land Title Act, there are some limitations. When a road goes along a property line, you can only take a maximum of 10 meters.
Okay.
And that's essentially where where we get half roads from. So.
And is block 16 at the bottom developed currently?
No.
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 Okay. I thought the church was there too.
No.
Okay.
No. Right down there, that is, I believe it is zoned R1A at the moment. So it has development potential.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. I think that's all I had on that. Thank you.
So if I could just jump in then and comment off that piece. That road, the upper half road in the top left corner, that's to be developed now, is it?
At the time of subdivision, yes. This, of course, isn't the final layout, but this is a potential layout, yeah.
Okay, and so since we're putting that half road up there, in theory, then it starts to preclude what could be built on Block 11, would it not?
Yes, and that is something the layout of Block 11 would be affected by that, and that is something the approving officer has to take into consideration. So, how that layout of Lot 11 can function, so.
Okay. Further to that, Councillor Seegers.
Yeah, I'm concerned about the half road up there. And then I remember when this first came to us, Councillor Shanks actually mentioned something about water along the length of the lot, the whole lot on the right side on the picture, and I'm wondering how that's being addressed.
There would be at the time of, they of course would be responsible for a stormwater management plan at the time of development that would look at any of their on-site water, and they'd have to manage it so it doesn't go on to neighboring properties. I believe there is a right-of-way along the these developed properties here to the east. But I'm trying to remember if that was for sanitary and storm or just for sanitary. I can't quite remember. But yeah, that is something that would be looked at as part of the development. They, of course, they wouldn't be able to dump water onto the neighboring properties.
Okay.
Councillor Shanks.
Yeah, I think it's basically a drainage ditch which is on those properties to the east. But the issue is always keeping it clear because there were trees that were felled and various other things felled on this piece of property that were impacting that drainage system. And with the clearing of this, I'm going to assume that those issues won't be issues anymore. But that's a consideration when looking at it. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions on this proposal? Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. Are there alternatives to that half road at the top?
Through the chair, we have discussed a few alternatives. One that could still be a possibility is having a full road go straight up. However, that is quite steep in the area and would involve a lot more fill having to be brought onto the site to make it level with shoalway. So it's because it right along here, along these property lines, it does get quite steep right along there. So you would ever have to build fill to bring that up, or and then that would also have an effect, of course. So it's between balancing those two.
So going this direction actually minimizes the slope because you've got more distance?
Yes.
Okay.
Engineering also did a mock-up of a gentle curve, kind of going here and then slowly drifting this way. Again, narrowing down to a half road, but yes. But yeah, we have looked at other options as well. So.
Okay.
Further questions from committee? So on something like that, where we're starting to then preclude Block 11 from certain types of development, in theory, we could block off that little chunk of half road, make it a bollards and have it used for a different purpose if the layout on Block 11 was to be drastically different or something along those lines. Is that possible in our policies or not?
That would be a bollard specifically would be an odd choice for determining the layout. That is something the approving officer could look at. The approving officer has a duty to look at the future development of the lands adjacent to a proposal as well as the existing one. And a lot of those things do have to deal with access and how those ones could be developed. So this is why they have to provide the access to the lands beyond as part of this proposal. And it is something to kind of keep in mind.
Okay, and then I had one further comment. This came to us in a different form, and then it was changed substantially. So just for committee's knowledge, what happens in that situation with the application fee?
With the application fee, we didn't charge an additional application fee, but we did send out a secondary referral.
Okay, and I guess my only concern with that would be there's a fair amount of staff time associated with a significant change like this. It seems somewhat favorable to developer to do that, and we've also seen it takes committee time, so that's something for staff to consider in a situation where there's a change after we've seen it. In my mind, at least, it would make sense that there's an additional payment for that. Further discussion from committee on this? Do I have someone to move recommendation 2? Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Okay.
This is a further comment.
Councillor Shanks.
Yeah, it's very point that you bring up when we do get an initial application in and there's a secondary application followed up afterwards. Depending on the time frame for that and the amount of time that it does take, I could see an apportionment of that initial fee.
Director Corbett.
Through the chair, there's one thing we noticed actually on the fees bylaw is that there isn't provision on the revision. So it's either a brand new application, and in some cases that can be quite punitive. So in looking at the fees bylaw, I think it would make sense in the development stuff to have indications there for revisions with a different fee. If it's revision with you have to re-refer, because that's quite time consuming, that it's 1% of it, and if it doesn't require referral, maybe we do something it's still a fee, but much less, actually reflecting the cost recovery on the time. But it was something that I noted with a few of these is we didn't really have that ability through that bylaw.
Okay, well, maybe that's something to follow up on a policy basis. It's something that we've tried to do as a council, is to try to shift some of the fees related to development and the applications over to the people that are actually benefiting from it, the developers. And that's one of the things, is because, as anyone knows here who's been working in development in Sechelt, we have so many coming through the door, and it's so extremely costly for us to provide those services that we've been trying to recoup some of that and more of that for the taxpayer, and more of that will be happening in the future, as I can only assume. Okay, moving ahead. Item 6.4, Van Key Developments, Development Permit Application, Development Variance Permit Application. Can I have a move for receipt? Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Mr. Aaron Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So these are the two applications from Van Key Development Inc. for their project in Selma Park. So here you can see the proposed parcel. It's quite a large parcel here between Habeas Road and Nessman Road. Here you can see Highway 101. So this property has a bit of a longer history to it. It has seen several development proposals over the year. As part of this most recent one, they are looking at doing a 66 lot subdivision. So it is currently zoned R1. It has an OCP designation of low density residential, and it falls within two development permit areas, DPA 2 and DPA 5. So the proposal is for 66 lot residential subdivision. The development permit is for development permit areas 2 and 5 to support that subdivision. And the variance permit is to vary the service requirements of Bylaw 430. So here you can see the development proposal. So some of the key things, here you can see Laurel Road, which is designated as a collector road in the OCP connecting forward. The main access being Nessman Road here. An extension of Betty Road coming down here that would go along the rears of these properties and along this edge. Again, this would be proposed a half road, but there is some further dedications along here that could would be eventually a full road. And then you can see the Eternal Road network looping here. Just in general, most of these lots are around 1,000 square meters in area, so they are quite large for this area, for the zoning. They can almost be half this size based on the current zoning. So talking about the development permit first, so here you can see how the development permit areas are on the site. In general, the property has a fairly gentle slope down towards Davis Bay, just going along this way. There are a few specific, I'm pretty sure these are mostly just fill piles at this point from previous developments. But there are a few interdispense steep slopes. The main area of concern is the Chapman Creek Ravine here. But you can see right here, which I believe it drops about 50 meters in a quite short distance. It is quite a large steep slope, and this is also where you can see the orange, which is the floodplain hazard. So this is the main area of concern with the development permit. Luckily, as you can kind of see on part of this development, this area is not being developed. It's the residential developments are being kept outside this area to avoid those hazards. So, as I just said, the geotechnical report that we have received, and it confirms that based off of that layout, those residential developments are safe from hazards, and there's nothing that would preclude this development. There's of course some basic recommendations, such as the footings and foundations, as well as the fill needed for, say, roadways and other municipal infrastructure. So the development permit is quite relatively straightforward. The development variance permit has kind of 5 different variances included in it. I've kind of color-coded them a bit to show, to kind of describe what I'm going at. So here you can see the variance along Nessman and Laurel Road here in the green. The orange Nessman section here, the unnamed roads here in blue, Habeas is in pink, and Betty Road is in yellow. So the Laurel Nessman Road variances. So Laurel Road has been designated as a collector road. Our current collector standard is a bit out of date. That is found in Bylaw 430. It has 11 meters wide pavement for shared bike lanes and travel lanes for vehicles. based off of kind of the more modern, the more recent engineering design principles, they're actually looking at having the roadways being shrunk, so it's only 7.3 meters wide, and then removing the bike lanes and having them on the separate multi-use pathways, which are then shared by pedestrians and cyclists. So it does help to reduce the conflict between cyclists and vehicles. So what this variance would look at, it would be changing from our current standard to what a standard we'd actually want to move into when Bylaw 430 is revised. And that it does have and it features the 7.3 meter wide pavement and then the 2 separated multi-use pathways on either side of the road that are shared for pedestrians and cyclists. So staff are in support of this, as this is the direction we want to start moving into with our collector roads. The only kind of caveat that is the applicant has requested that they not have to do the multi-use pathway on the north side of Nessman Road. However, staff are recommending that it is still be a requirement, as engineering has stated some safety concerns with having without having the downhill sidewalk or with downhill sidewalk. They're fine without having the multi-use pathway, but they would still need to have separate pedestrian access. Bicycles going downhill aren't, and because they're traveling much faster, don't typically have the same conflict they do with vehicles on either level or uphill slopes. So engineering has made that recommendation, which is in more detail in my report. The Habeas Road variance, the main request, typically we require about a 1.5 to 2 meter boulevard in between the curb and the sidewalk. This variance is to remove that requirement so that the curb and sidewalk will be right aligned. It would be right beside each other. This has it does have some concerns. It typically involves these developments, the sidewalk being a little less friendly for people in mobility scooters or wheelchairs or along with strollers, as there would be more dips whenever there is a crossing along the sidewalk. So typically we like to see that separation, which reduces that dip. As well as reviewing the drawings, there appears to be enough room to have this boulevard. So staff are not recommending this variance, as there doesn't seem to be a good justification for it, and there seems to be adequate room to provide a boulevard. The unnamed roads, essentially the same as the Habeas Road variance. They're seeking to eliminate the requirement for a boulevard. This is just happens to be on the full road section instead of the half road section of Habeas, but there's still quite adequate room. You can see here how much room there would be, so there is enough room to provide that boulevard. Betty Road, this is the variance is actually increasing the road width. Our half road standard in Bylaw 430 is for 4.5 meters wide, while they're seeking 5.5 meters wide on that. There's no issue with that, and staff are able to support that variance. Oh, sorry, I didn't include, I missed one drawing here. But I would like to talk about the Nessman variance, probably a bit the most complex one. Apologize. So this variance here is for this orange section. As you can see, this section of road, which is a right-of-way that currently exists, would dead end into Chapman Creek, so this road doesn't service anything beyond this property. Developing it doesn't really serve any real purpose, but that would be a requirement under Bylaw 330. So working with the developer, we're looking at removing that requirement for a road and instead having that developed as a pedestrian pathway connecting into the Chapman Creek Trail network. The applicant has requested a 2 meter wide gravel pathway with only one street light one light at the western end of the pathway where it intersects with Laurel Avenue. Staff are recommending that instead be a 2 meter wide paved pathway with the one street light, as well as a bench connecting down with a bench on the western end, and it connects into the Chapman Creek Trail network along here. The main reason for a lot of the main reason for pathing is both for the smooth surface, as well as there is a bit of a slope here where it goes down to this bank, and if it is gravel, there will be the potential for washouts there. So engineering would be preferred. Operations would like to see that paved. So staff are in support of the main concept of improving the road, but would like to see a slightly different servicing standard there. So getting to the recommendations, the first recommendation is for development permit, and that development permit be approved for this property, and that the property shall be developed in accordance with the geotechnical assessment prepared by Western Geotechnical Consultants, and that the development variance permit be approved for 3 variances: the modifying of the collective road standard to the standard I showed previously, the 7.3 meter wide travel lanes with 3.5 meter multi-use pathways on either side, modifying the urban half road standard for Nessman Road from the intersection of Laurel Road to the connection of the Chapman Creek Trails to having 2 meter wide paved pathways, the ornamental streetlight, a bench on the western side. I forgot to mention that the engineering department also requested 3 parking stalls there to accommodate anyone who would be using the Chapman Creek Trail network at there, and that avoid people parking in front of people's houses or other on-street parking on the collector road. And finally, the last variance that we're recommending is the modifying the urban half road standard for the extension of Betty Road to the 5.5 meter wide pavement. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. There was a lot to keep track of in that one.
Yes.
I hope committee has a strong hand on all the different variances required and what they all mean. Any questions from committee on this report? Councillor Lutz.
There's no discussion in the report around the intersections on the highway of Nessman and Habeas. Whose responsibility with this increased traffic will those intersections affect?
We have actually, as part of the process for the subdivision, MOTI did request a traffic impact study. The applicant has completed that, and there were no works that were required as part of this development based on that traffic impact study.
And I can assume that MOTI was given that report as well?
Yes.
Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. Will these lots be serviced by septic?
That is a ongoing discussion we're having. They are looking at actually running a sewer line from Seashelt to this property to service these properties by sewer line. And that would be through excess work with quite a large latecomer agreement.
Okay, but that's not part of what we're looking at now?
No, there would be no variances required for that.
Okay, thank you.
Just on that particular, or maybe it's not time to get into that, but would that be coming back to committee for further decision, or is that something that we would be informed of at a later date?
Yes, as part of the latecomers agreement, of course, that would take council's approval. So we don't do too many latecomer agreements here. I'm not quite sure with the process, but I would assume it go to planning committee before council.
Right. Yeah, on that one, I'm just, I have a lot of questions about that. That would be a fairly significant piece of infrastructure. And so we need a lot more information. I don't see that this particular development is hinging upon that because they have other options, but it'd be good to get more information on that. Councillor Shanks.
Yeah, just a couple of concerns, and I guess it's just in the back of my mind. I don't know why we have to keep extending bike paths where there are no existing bike paths, and the one specifically mentioned on Laurel Road. The other thing that I have ascertained through staff is that all the surveying and everything else that's happening in that area coming into Seashell is in fact potentially to accommodate this development as regards sewer. So, and other developments that could happen in the Davis Bay area. But it's interesting that this particular development starts at where any particular connection to sewer would have gravity feed from Habeas Road, you know, basically down to Selma Park Road. Yeah. But we'll await that coming forward.
Okay. 1 second for Councillor Shanks' phone. So if you could put back up the lot layout. So in the northern edge, if you just go back to that. Or sorry, I guess that would be the eastern edge. We get into some topography there, but I noticed that the municipal road is, if you could turn that off, Mike, thanks. The municipal road is right at the top of a large slope, and I think anyone who lives in Seashell knows that entire slope along Chapman Creek is constantly moving. So I'm just wondering if engineering has done some risk analysis on that.
It is in the geotechnical assessment. They do provide recommendations along that, and those are the kind of things that this development permit would require, that they meet those design standards of developing the road along that edge. The initial PL, the preliminary layout review, did note that they would have to be the road would have to be set back as required by a geotechnical engineer. So that is an assessment that will need to be done. But we do have the geotech essentially already done. So.
Okay, and then my other question was about the pathway in the yellow there. So most of the Chapman Creek Trail network at this point is a gravel trail network, and this would be more or less the first bit of pavement on that whole network. So maybe you could just expand the rationale a little bit on that in terms of why we're asking.
Yeah, so we are asking for a pavement, again, due to just this having a smooth travel surface, as well as because it is going down this slope, kind of hard to see at this area right here, that engineering was concerned with the ongoing maintenance of washouts and everything in that area. So that's really the just reasoning behind that.
Any future plans to redo the rest of the network in pavement, or is that we're just going to have this for the time being? And
it would just be this for the time being. Yes.
Okay. Councillor Shanks.
You know, my other concern, Mr. Chairman, is to the best of my knowledge, I think the extension of Habeas Road from Betty Road down to the highway is only half width. And that would pose huge issues in terms of accessing and egress off of the highway. Perhaps as it is pictured here, Nessman Road is in fact a full width from the extension of Betty Road down to the highway. But I believe Habeas Road is only half a road width. So,
through the chair, if I may, that is correct. We're looking at, rather than having kind of two access points, because this isn't the full dedication here, which makes development of a road difficult or nearly impossible in that direction to kind of support this. It would be having the main development, and that's why developing Nessman to that full width is going to be required. And that is also an excess and extended works that would be required as a latecomer agreement, because a lot of these properties would have development potential in the future. So a lot of that frontage there. But so it's just looking at developing that one frontage to a higher standard to avoid that.
Okay, so one of the issues for me on this is that we know that we are planning to do bylaw for 430 at some time, and we're starting to now deal with developments as if bylaw 430 has changed. So I'm just wondering if we can get a comment from staff on that particular issue. Are we going to be seeing other developments coming forward with some ideas regarding 430 contained in them, or is this kind of a one-off?
It is a possibility. And it's mostly in regards to collector or arterial roads that the standard really is lagging behind more current engineer practices. The local road standard wouldn't change much through that, and that's what probably about 80% of our roads, or not even 90% of our roads are. So we wouldn't be seeing a lot of variances to this road standard, but mostly just dealing with these collector roads. Lower roads is one of those ones of note. There's also, of course, the Neptune Tyler Derby connection there in West Seashell might be the only other one I could mention, but hopefully the bylaw is revised before any of those really come up. So.
Okay, so that speaks again to the need to redo bylaw 430, just to get this all squared away in policy. Okay. For any further questions from committee on this? Seeing none, do I have a mover for recommendation 2? Moved, seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Seegers.
I'd like to thank staff for laying this out. It took a bit to get through all of the various particulars, but I like what you've done. It's a good project. Thank you.
So I had a question before we vote about the way this recommendation is written. It looks a little bit different than some of the others we've seen in terms of format. Just the recommendation itself. Is this something we're going to be seeing more of?
Yes, I believe, yes.
So just the way that's written, block A, except firstly, part and plan, secondly. I understand what it means, but I just...
It's good always to reference the legal description when making kind of motions like this, just because legal descriptions are, of course, the legal, and addresses can change and everything. So this is probably the clearest way to get with what you're intending. So.
Okay. Thanks for that. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. We have a mover for recommendation number 3. Moved and seconded. Any discussion on this? All those in favor? And that's carried. Okay, so we've seen a number today of infill developments, types of density on them, and we know from the past that these can make nice little neighborhoods, and it is part of the plan. It's part of the larger plan of Seashell, and it's good to see these coming ahead because they're, of course, developing land that has already been cleared and serviced, and it's ready to go, and now they can be neighborhoods. So moving on to item 6.5, official community plan amendment bylaw for Wade and a zoning bylaw for Wade. Report from the community planner, Mr. Aaron Thompson. Moved and seconded for receipt. All those in favor? And that's carried. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, this is the Wade OCP amendment and zoning bylaw applications. Again, this is a proposal that came to the planning committee back in November with just a rezoning, and then we are now bringing it forward with the associated official community plan amendment. As a refresher, this is for 3 properties located in the downtown neighborhood at the southeast corner of the intersection of Wharf Avenue and East Porpoise Bay Road and Ebb Tide Road. Here you can see measured map with the marsh here and Seashell Inlet here. So what the applications request, the OCP amendment is to permit a maximum allowable density from 100 units per hectare to 114 units per hectare for these specific properties. And the rezoning amendment is to change the zone from R2 to CD42 to allow for construction of a 6-story, 19.62 meter mixed-use development of a mainly residential building with 93 square meters of commercial space. So some of the background, the current OCP designation is for downtown center and mixed family residential. The proposed zoning is comprehensive development zone 42, and it does fall within development permit area 6, the downtown. So some of the project details. So this proposal has 47 units with a maximum height of 6 stories, 19.62 meters, maximum lot coverage of 45%. It has a 10-meter minimum setback from the current boundaries of Wharf Avenue and East Porpoise Bay Road, and 6 meters from the south and east property lines. And here you can see a bit of the plan. So you can see the building. There we are. You can see the building here. Here in this round part is the commercial space in the midst of a bigger public plaza. And this will be the first floor. As well as this does feature underground parking. This is a bit hard to see here, but the underground parking is, of course, at a bigger setback, but wouldn't be noticeable above ground. The elevation, it would be completely below ground, and those setbacks would be you wouldn't be able to see them. Also, you can see here, as part of this development, they would be giving up 5-meter wide strips along the frontage for expansion of this intersection here. So just some of the drawings here. Here is showing the height, so it is 6 stories. That was varied a little bit, and in your report, I had discussions with the architect more recently, and there were some changes to how the height was calculated. So it did quote some different numbers in my report, but it is the 19.62 meters. And that's, the height hasn't changed, it's just how we measure height. I had to have that discussion with the architect to make sure that we're speaking the same language when we're talking about height. So it is still 16 stories. Six stories, not 16. Sorry. My apologies there. Yeah. Yes. So we can just again with 6 stories. You can see how the height is in the various forms. So that was the long way, which would be kind of how it would be looking on East Porpoise Bay Road. And this is if you're kind of looking directly on either from Wharf Avenue or from behind the building of how that height would look. The property doesn't have too much of a slope to it. It is quite a gentle slope, so the grade kind of does gently go down here. But essentially that's where we had those changes in height discussed. Some of the how it could potentially look, some early architectural drawings. The previous one would be from the northwest corner of the intersection, looking directly at that building. This would be if you're going along Wharf Avenue alongside the building. So some of the kind of more technical aspects, a geotechnical report is required. That was identified in the previous report, and that would have to be completed prior to public hearing. Similar to the archaeological study that was requested by the Seychelles Nation, that it would be required and need to be completed prior to public hearing. There is water service available. A water modeling study does need to be completed as part of this part of development of this site. There's adequate sewer capacity, and it will need to connect to the existing main on Ebtide Street. Stormwater management plan is quite standard and required as part of development. The traffic impact study was completed by Binney, and council has previously received that for a lot of the other downtown developments, and no works directly contributed to this development. Fire protection, it has been confirmed with the fire department that it can be adequately serviced, as well as it would require sprinklers in the BC building code. Community fit, this would be the tallest building in the area. However, the OCP does support redevelopment of the area to similar heights, or if not the same height. Excuse me. Some of the alignment with our vision and policy. So in terms of growth management, this is the main priority growth area in our downtown. This property is already serviced, and this development wouldn't require too many servicing upgrades. in terms of having compact development and walkable communities, is in the downtown center designation, is walkable to many services, walkable to the waterfront. This development also, of course, helps prevent sprawl by providing a high density in a small area. It also further supports active transportation choices through cycling, through walking, as many of the services people need are in quite close distance, as well as supporting the development of transit into this area into the future. In terms of our Downtown First policy, it provides a mix of uses and is supported by both, I believe, by the Downtown Business Association, and I believe the Chamber of Commerce also supported it. And it provides a good transition to multifamily areas. It also helps to provide a range of housing options, as Sechelt is currently dominated by single-family residential. This does provide the multifamily option and provides a range of unit sizes. I think it ranges from about 800 square feet to about 1,600 square feet in the building itself. So there's quite a large range, as well as building green and sustainability. There is a commitment as part of the density increase from the owner to build to a built green gold or standard or higher. So as well, they are proposing some amenity contributions, and that's the built green gold standard, the or higher, built accessible or adaptable, and 5 units of affordable housing. As well as it is good to consider that increasing the supply overall also helps to address some of the affordability issues that the district is facing. So the recommendations are that the official community plan amendment and the zoning bylaw are both given first reading. That when it gets to council, the council considers it in conjunction with the current financial plan, the Sunshine Coast Regional District's solid waste management plan, our liquid waste management plan, and the registration of our wastewater treatment plan on the municipal wastewater regulations. And finally, that staff be authorized to schedule a public hearing for both these bylaws, subject to receiving those technical reports I previously mentioned. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your report. I noted in here that our advisory planning committee did not approve this plan. Were there any staff members present that could perhaps give us a more in-depth update on that, because we haven't received the minutes yet from that meeting? So.
Have the minutes? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so we just received this. Does committee want to take a minute to read through this before we proceed? Thanks for your patience. At these committee meetings, we often give committee members time, just if there's any new information or if we want to discuss things or pull them out in greater depth, that we do that here rather, because we won't get a chance at council, and that's precisely what committee meetings are for. So if the committee has had a chance to have a look at those minutes, I think it's pretty clear. So I'll open this up for questions on the report. Councillor Shanks.
Yeah, somewhat disturbed by some of the comments in terms of the report. And yet, yes, the OCP does allow for 6-story redevelopment in our community. However, the guiding document is the vision document, which doesn't indicate that at all. It indicates up to 4 stories. And while we're talking about this, I'm well aware of the referral that's come back from the SDBA and the Chamber of Commerce. And if you follow those referrals that have been sent out, the same groups were in favor of the SSC development as well. So they're in favor of anything, it would appear, that creates affordable housing. But the reality is, if we have documents in place that create more opportunities for higher density in the downtown core, and they don't seem to realize that we're looking after their business interest by encouraging that development to take place in the downtown core. The 6 stories has only come about as a result of what's on Toreto Street here. There's this proposed, and there's another one apparently going to come before us, I understand, from Green Court that wants 6 stories. I'd like to know, this is the ideal picture to show me, because I'd like to know what the setback is from that building to the current retail and condos that are to the south of that building. And if it's sort of minimal requirement setback, you're going to be looking up at 2 stories of building. You don't have a view I realize you don't have a view out that way. You may have a glimpse view right now, sort of thing. But even if a building was constructed to the same height as the one which is south of it, your view would be gone. But 6 stories is imposing considerably. And the lay of the land is such, as our planner has pointed out, that from this intersection going east, the land does drop down. So if in fact the parking area is going to be below even that level, that'll take the overall height of this building down considerably. But if the parking, underground parking, is in fact going to be at that lower level, okay, and cut out to accommodate the level at the end of that particular piece of property, then that makes a big difference in what it's going to look like at this corner. Thank you.
Any response to any of that from the planner?
Yeah, through the chair. I don't have the drawing here in my presentation, but we have got a kind of a survey done that shows the elevations at the various corners of the building. On this side here, we have it's about 11.5 to 11 along this edge of the building, and just in this corner it dips down to about 9.8. The underground parking would be coming in here, so it would be kind of localized depression to go down there, but all the parking would be below the 11.5 meter mark. So it might be the parking might be a little bit higher on this side than the existing grade, essentially a bit higher, and then on this side it would be below that grade on the Wharf Avenue side. So.
And then in regards to the heights, in our policy documents, it talks about 4 potentially going to 6, not along the waterfront and not where views are impacted. So at what point would we be looking at views in relation to this, because we're moving ahead in some areas, and I know that doesn't come at this time. So at what point would we be looking at that?
That would be an appropriate thing to look at this time. There's when it comes to managing views, there are different schools of thought. A lot of the time you are trying to manage views from important public locations, as you can't a lot of the time manage views from private locations, neighbor to neighbor and such. Those often do provide difficulties. What we have been looking at with this proposal, we have looked at setting the building quite a ways back. So the main building here is about 15 meters back from Wharf Avenue. This section here is a bit closer to still provide quite a bit of open space here along the front for this adjacent building here. And then there's a 6-meter setback along this way here. So there is still some separation of space. In terms of a view study or view corridor analysis, that hasn't been done, but that is a possibility that could be done to kind of look at the impact there.
Okay, so we got the answer on this setback, which I think was an important one. Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. Page 162. Under community fit, there's a sentence in there that says, the density is comparable to the development directly south of this proposal. So that's 4 stories,
Correct.
but has less height and more lot coverage. So if we were to take this proposal and keep the same number of units, but reduce the height, that would then expand it on the lot as well, which would more directly impact view corridors for this existing building. Is that correct?
It certainly could. If you were to increase the site coverage, you'd have to, of course, increase the massing, and that would be looking at probably reduced setback. Again, depending on what you want to do, you'd be looking at increased site coverage. Right now, it's sitting at 44.1% lot site coverage. The zoning bylaw does allow up to 45% lot coverage for a little bit of flexibility. And you'd be probably looking more towards what the property to the south and a lot of other more intensive designations have is around 75% lot coverage. That's a bit more typical for that kind of density.
Sorry, I got a little confused now. You said 44.1%
lot coverage.
And 45 is what?
The 45 is what's allowed in the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. I tried to round up to provide a little bit of flexibility when it comes to the building permit stage. So,
but as per the zoning, they could go to 75% coverage.
That would be based off of a kind of comparable zone to densities. But
just through the chair to clarify, if they went to an R4 zone, that would be fairly typical for this type of development. They can go up to a 75% lot coverage. This is with the CD zone. As part of their bonusing, they did more open space, so it's at a 45%, give or take, lot coverage. So it's got a very different footprint to it. But that would be their option if they rezone to an R4. That's what it would look like. It would punch out far more in the around the Wharf Avenue, to get the unit count.
Okay, and then I noticed there is some setback when you go above the first 2 floors. Some on the front. I didn't see much on the back.
You can see it here. So this would be the existing 3-story building along Wharf Avenue here. You can see there. So it'd be 2 stories up, and these are kind of like decks or patios here, and it's on both sides of the building there.
Okay, but not on the front so much?
No, not on the front. There's I think maybe there's kind of the misaligned building set back there, but I don't know if I have a good picture to show it. No, there wouldn't be really there's no terracing on the front there.
And this picture shows construction right above the commercial.
Yes.
Is that the proposal now? The proposal we saw before did not have residential above the commercial.
The previous proposal did, yes.
Oh, I thought it was back and smaller. Okay.
Yeah, I believe the one that we saw originally had the pavilion separate from this building.
Yeah, the round part has, since it's gone to planning committee, had residential above it.
Okay, that's a change from when we saw it before.
Okay.
Okay.
If we go to another drawing, you'll see that right there. See it?
Yeah. So this is the first floor. And I believe in your package you have the full package, but on the higher floors there, it does build on. You don't? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That has. You can kind of see it here again with the height above that. This would be if you're kind of looking at, well, this would be if you're looking at along the side of East Porpoise Bay, or or behind it with on the other adjacent property. Here you could see the kind of the pavilion area here.
Further comment, Council Seegers.
Thank you. Personally, I don't have an issue with the height. I like the number of units. I don't like the, what I see as lack of terracing back, particularly from the street. I like it from the sides. I like the lot coverage, and I like the way it's away from the other building. But I'd like to see more on the terracing back, particularly from Wharf.
Okay.
That's where I'm at.
Director Corbett.
Sorry, just to get some clarification, so that we can communicate with the applicant. The terracing, is it away from the apartment building that you want to see, the existing, or you're okay with that? It's more from Wharf Avenue itself, pushing it back? Okay, thank you.
Council Lutz with the question.
I would prefer that each floor was stepped back so that it wasn't such a big box plunked down on the property. I've spent a lot of time these last few weeks in New Westminster, and the most attractive buildings are those, like Waterfront even, that are terraced back each floor. They're still getting the density. I'm okay with the 6 stories. I like the density. I think it's important where the neighborhood's so walkable. That's another thing I'm finding. New Westminster isn't walkable. But I would like to see the look of the building something more than this big block.
Okay, and that is somewhat reflected in the discussion that we saw coming out of the APC, where the recommendation for us to reduce the height was defeated, and as well the recommendation for additional density for the OCP was denied, and that was carried. So I think what we're left with is they were expressing a number of concerns, and yeah, we're gonna have to take that into account some way. So. I guess if there are no further questions, we'll just start to work our way through the recommendations. Do I have a mover for recommendation 2? Actually, before we do that, I had a number of questions coming out of my review of the last report we saw, and it was just a number of requirements that we had met before we go to first hearing, and that was geotech, dealing with the archaeological issues, a public info meeting, affordable housing amenities, and servicing. Have all those been dealt with?
Through the chair, it is the servicing, I believe, was a condition of adoption, as well as the affordable housing amenities. where conditions of adoption not prior to public hearing. The geotechnical and the archaeological, the applicant is aware of those, and I've had a recent conversation with him that those would need to be done prior to public hearing. So.
Okay, thank you for that. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Oh, Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. I assume that these 3 lots would be consolidated into one through this? Thank you.
Okay, do I have a mover for recommendation number 2, that official community plan amendment be given first reading? It's a recommendation to council. Moved and seconded, Shanks and Seegers. Any discussion of that? So the OCP is about the density? All those in favor? That's carried. Okay. So the next one, recommendation 3, is about the heights. And that's to go to a CD 42 zone. Do I have a mover? Moved and seconded, Lutz and Seegers. Discussion. Councillor Shanks.
Yeah, both 2 and 3, I'm only wanting to move this quickly to public hearing, so that's why I'm supporting these things, and then I'll hear what the public has to say.
Any further discussion on the CD 42? Okay, I just wanted to jump in here. In my understanding of the neighborhood and this, I'd like to see a lot more view analysis of this. I'm concerned about the heights. I would not be in favor of moving this forward at this point, so I'll be voting against it. All those in favor? That's carried. 1 opposed. Recommendation number 4, that the OCP community plan be considered in conjunction with our various policies, the financial plan, solid waste management plan, liquid waste management plan, and wastewater treatment. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? That's carried. Recommendation 5, that staff be authorized to schedule a public hearing for the OCP and zoning amendment bylaws. Moved and seconded. Discussion.
Thank you. If we move this forward, this does not go forward until those other conditions are met, correct? Thank you.
Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, through the chair, that is correct. Those have been set by previous resolution of council, so those won't move forward until then.
Okay. All those in favor? And that's carried. Okay, so we dealt with that one. And the last item on our agenda is the development action chart for receipt. Moved and seconded. Receipt. Yeah, any discussion of that?
Okay.
Councillor Shanks.
Yeah, I guess on page, oh my God, where are the glasses when you need them? Looks like 155, but it could be 185.
185.
Let's go for 185 then. Yeah, midway down the list, particular concern to myself and others perhaps in downtown community is the prime signal property on the corner of Trail and Cowrie Street. I know I had to seek the gentleman's permission to use his property last year for the car show. He said, by the way, can you do something for me in terms of the infrastructure requirements for this particular property? So I'm concerned that this may not go ahead. And it's now been since September, since I guess we've had any contact with the individual at all. And because there are required infrastructure costs and those which are mandatory and those which are optional, I would just like to see us follow up because it would be a cornerstone for that particular piece of property. That's my only suggestion, I guess.
Dr. Corbett?
We did have an indication a little while ago that there had been some communication. Again, we did follow up with him because it had been on the book. So we will be getting into discussion on that of, yes, there are some mandatories and there are some others that were not, that are really the stumbling block on this. So it'll need to be kind of reconsidered and renegotiated on that to get it moving forward.
Thanks very much.
Any further questions, Councillor Seegers?
Thank you. Same page. Blue Ocean Golf Club, I noticed it on this one and one other one. It says application closed due to inactivity. I know it's not dead, but it just hasn't moved anywhere. So what happens if and when they come forward? Again, they reopen it and start over, or?
Director Corbett?
I'm not familiar with that particular one, but there is some development permits will they expire, and so it's a case where if it's gone too long, they have to reapply.
Okay.
It will really depend. Sometimes they'll ask for an extension, and they'll let it run for a little bit longer. So it really depends on the nature of it. But under our development procedures bylaw, there are certain timeframes in there.
Okay. And then Clayton Family Lands, Westbrook by the Sea. I notice in here it says application withdrawn. So they've gone.
Director Corbett?
Through the chair, on that particular one, they have withdrawn that application. They are looking at redoing that area, but they haven't actually submitted an application showing the revision. We've certainly had discussions, but they haven't actually formally resubmitted on it.
Okay.
Well, that's good.
And then I noticed further down, we have still an application on here from Trellis. So that's still active, even though there's conversation in the community about putting that proposal somewhere else.
Just playing all their options.
Through the chair, yes, the applicant has chosen not to withdraw, so they will keep it active as long as the permit is not expiring, and that's up to any applicant. They can do that. Sometimes it's just risk management of they keep an option open.
Okay.
Unreal.
Okay, and of course, all of those questions kind of speak to the need for the cost that we charge developers to deal with this to reflect the true costs of that service, because we've had a bunch of major applications here that have come through, taken a tremendous amount of time and not gone ahead. And that has nothing to do with anything that happened around the council table.
That's right.
So just something to note. I had a question about SSC properties. And in here it's written down as project denied by council. This is one of the first ones procedurally that went this way. I felt as the planning chair that it should have gone back to planning when they added 2 stories in between planning and council. And I'm just curious if staff has any comment on that. At what point does it trigger that it goes back to the beginning of the process? And this is just for my information in terms of a change.
All right, just to clarify, on the SSC
Yes.
properties, there are a number of ways that could have happened. There wasn't, in looking at, there wasn't any motion from council saying we will not accept the 8 punted back to staff. Had there been a motion that actually directed it to go back, that would have been our opportunity to go back and be very clear with the applicant that unless that changes, it's not moving forward. But there wasn't actually any council motion on that. It was raised, I saw it in discussion minutes, but there wasn't actually any action provided that would actually speak on behalf of council as a whole on that. So it would have reduced the opportunities actually to go back, because what we need to be able to communicate to an applicant is this is the will of council, of speaking as council to make these changes. And there was nothing in there.
Okay. And so where it sits now, I believe they have an opportunity, if they want to address some of these things, to reapply within 6 months. Is that correct?
The chair, there's a reapplication interval of 6 months. If it is substantially the same development, they could come, the only way they could come in earlier is if it was significantly changed. It's always a little bit of a judgment call, but it's usually a certain percentage of it being quite different. They can't just alter the one building and say it's a different application. It needs to be something that's quite different if it comes in before that 6 months.
And that it would be for the same application fee? Or would
No,
there be an
that would
additional
be a
fee?
reapplication. Now it is effectively ended. It would be a reapplication full fee on that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Segers, further question?
Thank you. Last page, page 190. This is looking at some of the community planning projects. So the first one on the list is the Integrated Community Sustainability Plan, and it has an expected date for next action of February 2018. Do we have an updated date on that?
Director Corbett.
Through the chair. So there was delay on that, and there seemed to be kind of a cross communication with the consultant who thought that they were waiting for us. We thought we were waiting for them. So they were waiting for a draft action plan. So that had been submitted to them last week, and what they'll do from that is finish up that last phase, put it into the draft. So they needed some direction from us at the staff level and the manager's level of what would be those action steps, and then they'll put that into draft, and the draft will come back. So we're working to a fairly tight timeline on that. We asked for an extension from FCM on the grant for 3 months just to make sure we covered that off. And I believe we're going to lose the consultant for maternity leave, so that's really the driver on this one, on timing of getting that done.
Okay. So we'll see something coming forward in the next while. Okay, there's one more on that page. Recreational Marijuana Production and Retail Bylaw. And it indicates March of 2018. Well, we're through March, so are we going to be seeing something coming through fairly soon?
Director Corbett.
Through the chair, that one got delayed simply because the file manager was dealing with some other applications that got punted back to us. So our timeline has been moved. So she was working on that one and hope to get it through fairly quickly. We had discussion of should we do it through the zoning bylaw, but I think there'll be too much delay in there. So we had looked at options of how to manage it primarily so that we are not connecting it to just general retail. Right, so it'll probably come in with a separate definition of what that is. It won't do, I don't believe, across the board prohibit it, but define it differently so that anyone coming forward knows that it's not just if you've got an application for retail that you're allowed. It'll separate it out.
And we'll be addressing the residential zones, et cetera, inside of that?
Through the chair, in terms of the plants per house, no, we're not going to touch that, mainly because it's impossible to regulate. It's an RCMP issue, and we will leave it with them. If it got into zoning, we are now looking at our bylaw officers having to manage that, and I honestly don't know how we'd do it. So we'll leave it with the, unless we get a whole lot more clarification on what that looks like. It's just an area where we really would prefer to be silent on that one.
Okay, I guess what's shown up at some of the conventions that we've gone to is more concern around multifamily, right? In that's a residence, et cetera. And I don't know how we'd look at dealing with that. I assume we're going to have this coming forward in sufficient time to be able to get out to the community with it and get some feedback to help us inform what they'd like.
Director Corbett.
Through the chair, there are a couple things that we would need to address at the same time. One is the smoking bylaw, because no matter what we do with the regulations around what they're smoking, we need to have some pretty good regulations around how to manage that, particularly in public areas. Stratas will probably need to do it through the balconies and that sort of thing, because we're seeing it certainly it's coming up now a lot more anecdotally of issues that people are having. It's quite impactful. Neighborhood or backyard barbecues take on a whole new meaning, and so there's some concerns around how we manage that, and a lot of it's going to have to be either on the smoking bylaw, on nuisance issues. So we'll need to make sure that in our regulations that we've addressed it, or at least not precluded being able to address it through those. So I think it'll be a number of insertion points on that.
Okay, and we're still looking at July as making it legal at this point. It has gone to committee from the
So that's second
Senate,
reading.
right? So, okay,
I think
you.
we'll probably want a full process on that one. It's a big question for our community as to what that's going to be, the end of the criminalization of marijuana.
Mr. Chairman,
Councillor Shanks.
our director has brought up an interesting point about our smoking bylaws, so that would potentially include vaping as well.
The chair, a number of communities have done that, have revised their smoking bylaws. I think one that's been the most effective is BC Ferries, got on top of that one very, very quickly. And the way they define it is very broad. It includes everything. So they didn't have to get into a lot of nuancing it. It's everything, everywhere. That is BC Ferries property. So they did a very complete smoking bylaw. We've been looking at a number of different options, looking at different municipalities. How have they done it? How have they defined it? And that's going to be a key issue is really in the definition section. What have we included to make sure that a lot of those things are covered off?
Okay, well, we'll wait to see the final version of the federal legislation. I'm sure that will have large impact on that discussion. So if nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? That's carried. Public question and answer. The 8th Councillor.
I know that the Downtown Business Association has a lot to say about stuff, but I go to Robbie's quite often. She has no idea that she's part of downtown business. She hears nothing. So I don't know why the way it property gets sort of lumped into that, because the Downtown Business Association wants more and more density. The more density we have, I don't see more stores or restaurants or anything opening. And I think it's just really cruel. That little tiny apartment that got built 3 stories or whatever it is. Now you're gonna have this big giant, it's like Monty Python, the giant bank and the little bank. And it's just cruel. There isn't a huge view there, but there is. And they also get sun, daylight, and if they move it back, well, that's great, but it's not fine. The only thing is everything in the front of that building, the new building, is stores or commercial. It's not like they're just being cruel.